Hey guys, this is Gary Drum, and welcome back to the Killing a Fat Guy Show podcast. I am the author of Killing a Fat Guy: How to Kill the Fat Person Living in Your Mind and Create the Fit, Healthy Person You've Always Wanted to Be. I'm also the host here of the Killing a Fat Guy Show, and I'm also the host of Mindset Monday TV, which I'm kind of going to try a little merger thing today where I'm going to do the podcast and I'm going to shoot the Mindset Monday video at the same time, because the topics really go well together. So you'll be able to get this particular podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, and you'll also be able to get this on YouTube by going to Mindset Monday TV and checking out my Mindset Monday series that I'm doing there as well. So today I want to talk to you about a concept that I've been doing a lot of research on and really kind of doing a lot of thinking about and how it affects you on your fitness journey, on your weight loss journey, and what you're trying to do. And that's really an idea that I have that I'm actually working on a book for, called Radical Responsibility, and what radical responsibility really means. And at least as much as I've been able to ascertain that so far, and how you use radical responsibility in not only in your fitness journey, but in every area of life and everything that you do. So you can get an idea of how this concept applies and what you can do with it, and how it can really shape and affect your life. So the idea of radical responsibility really comes down to this idea that ultimately we are responsible for what happens with our lives, what we decide to do with our lives. And that's not to say that people don't have difficult circumstances or difficult situations that they have to live with, or difficult periods in which they live in their life. You know, maybe you're growing up in an unsupportive environment, or a violent environment, or something of that nature. And that doesn't mean that you're responsible for everything that goes on outside of you, outside of your environment. Doesn't mean you're necessarily responsible for that, but you are, I think, responsible for how you perceive it and how you decide to let it affect you or not let it affect you, and also what you're going to do about it. So the idea of radical responsibility is basically the idea of taking this radical position that I alone am responsible for who I am, where I'm going, and what I'm going to do about it. I'm responsible for how I think about it. I'm responsible for what it means to me. Now, we talked before about how not everything that's in your head with regards to who you are, who you think you are, or what your identity about yourself, not all of that comes from you. Some of that does come from outside of you. Some of that comes from your family. Some of that comes from your religious background or upbringing. Some of that comes from your friends, your school, where you've been brought up, and how you've been brought up, and what kind of environment you've been in. You know, the whole concept of nature versus nurture and what that really means. And what radical responsibility says is ultimately I am responsible for myself and for my life. If I don't like something in my life or in myself, I alone am responsible for changing it. I remember reading about a story. I think it was in the book by Jordan Peterson, where he was talking about a particular person that he was helping or doing therapy with. It might have been Jordan Peterson. It might have been another book. I don't know. I read a lot of books, but he was talking about the author was talking about this person who said, whose life was just a mess. And, you know, she had problems with relationships. She had problems with her job. She had problems with her health. And, she was just really down and really depressed about all of those things that were going on and how that life was kind of beating her up. And, the person talking to her says, well, who do you think is responsible for that? And she had a reply where she says, I hope it's me. And the guy was kind of taken aback by that. Well, what? Why do you hope you are responsible for all of this misery in your life? And this is a very wise response. This lady says, I hope it's me, because if I'm the one responsible, then I'm the one who has the power to change it. And what a great way to think about your life. If you are responsible for what is happening in your life, then you have the power to change it. So when you assign responsibility to someone else, when you say it's the government, or it's my job, or it's my spouse, or it's my kids, or it's all of the fast food joints that are within a 5-mile radius of my home. And when you put all that responsibility outside of yourself, when you make that someone else's responsibility, you really are giving up your power. You're giving up your power to someone else. And when you give up your power to someone else, that means someone else is controlling your life. People talk about politics, people talk about religion, and we want to blame God, or we want to blame the president, or we want to blame Congress, or we want to blame our city council, or the Supreme Court in some people's cases. We want to blame everybody else. But if we really look at it from the perspective of we are responsible, if we take this position of radical responsibility, on my wall here next to me, I have a whiteboard, and the only thing on the whiteboard right now is the words radical responsibility. And I do that to keep myself mindful that I am ultimately responsible for my life. I'm ultimately responsible for what I choose to do with my life and with my time and with my effort and all of the things that are happening to me or with me in my life. I am ultimately responsible for that. If I'm in a bad relationship, I'm responsible for that. Now, relationships take two people. Yes, that's true. But that's also true of the fact that it takes two people. Like, you have to be a participant in a relationship that is not healthy for you. You have to be taking a part in that, which means in some way you are responsible for that relationship and the state of that relationship and how it's going. If it's not going the way you want it to go, you could be with a person that you're just incompatible with, but you're responsible for staying in that situation. It's your responsibility to make that choice to stay or not to stay, to continue to put up with it or not put up with it. If you're not happy with where you are in your financial situation or your career, you're responsible for that. If you take this radical responsibility by saying, I am the one who has the power and the responsibility to change the things in my life that I don't want to be that way. It's my job. It's my duty to take on the responsibility and to do what I want to do and to live the kind of life that I want to live. So if you're not healthy right now, if you're morbidly obese or heavily overweight, you are responsible for that. It is not McDonald's fault. It is not Doritos' fault. It is not Coca-Cola's fault. It is your responsibility. I've done a video before about taking responsibility versus finding fault and the differences between the two. We're not trying to find fault. We're trying to find the place where I am responsible for it. Because if I'm responsible for it, I have the power to change it. I have the power to do new things, to think in different ways, and to think and do the things that move me towards whatever goal or ambition I have with regards to how I'm going to live my life. So if I'm overweight right now, that's my responsibility. I am not doing the things I need to do to not be overweight. It's nobody else's fault. even if I was abused as a child and I'm dealing with problems, which there's a great book called It's Not What You're Eating, It's What's Eating You. In that particular book, the author talks about the connection between obesity and childhood sexual exploitation or abuse, that many women in particular, from the focus of that book, are overweight because they were sexually abused or sexually assaulted when they were children. And so they turn that inward, and it kind of creates a self-hatred and a self-loathing that goes into that. And the book is great about discussing this and how it works. But it's about looking inside of yourself and finding out what is actually eating you that is making you eat so much. A lot of people who are overweight are dealing with very, very powerful negative associations, negative opinions of themselves. And so they eat in order to comfort themselves. They eat in order to make themselves feel better. They might eat to become overweight so that they are less attractive, so they're less likely to attract someone into their life who can be very, very beneficial for them. The body fat kind of becomes a layer of protection for them. And it's really kind of protecting that emotional child inside, but there's a great switch that happens when you go from being a child to being an adult. And one of the things about being an adult is to take responsibility for yourself, to take responsibility take on the most responsibility that you can. And ultimately that is what leads to a productive and meaningful life. So when you're going out there and trying to do something, it's not a life of leisure. It's not a life of leisure that leads to all of these great things. Everybody talks about, it's wonderful being on the beach and just taking a vacation. And that's great. Yeah, you do need some vacation time. It's good to get away from the normal day-to-day grind. But the reality is that happiness is often found in the grind. Happiness is often found by setting and pursuing and achieving goals and doing the things that are meaningful to you. And so the idea of radical responsibility comes down to this thought of taking full responsibility for who you are, taking full responsibility for where you are in your life right now, and making the changes that are necessary to build the life that you want to build, to live this ideal version of yourself. We talk about that all the time. How to kill the fat person living in your mind and create the fit, healthy person you've always wanted to be. What does that mean? That means there's an ideal. There's something you want to pursue that's a vision of who you could be if you took on the right mindset of things and you took on that responsibility and went out there and made those changes for yourself and for your life. And that's really what the whole concept of radical responsibility is all about. It's about taking responsibility for yourself and for your feelings and for your thoughts and for your beliefs and your opinions at the core level of who you are. When you understand that you alone are responsible for your life, no one is coming to save you. I was going to do a podcast this week around surrounded by the idea of no one cares about your problems. And ultimately, in a large sense, that's totally true. No one cares about your problems. People have their own problems to deal with. It is our responsibility in life to look at our problems, to look at our challenges and face our fears head on, and then go out and conquer those fears and fix our own problems. Now, that's not to say that you won't run into people along the way who will help you. That's certainly true. And there are people who do care to a certain point. But even the most caring people in your life can reach a point where it's just not healthy for you for them to continue to help. You know, there's the idea of the less you have, the less you will have, and the more you have, the more you will have. So that's a biblical concept that's talking about how when you seem to be going downhill, things start to go downhill a lot faster. More and more and more things start going downhill. There have been studies that show that for the elderly, they try to teach people who are helping the elderly in assisted living homes, don't do anything for the patients that the patients can do for themselves. Why? Because they need to have that sense of independence. They need to have that sense of ability. And the more you do for them, the less they will do for themselves. So take that rule and apply it to yourself and your own life, in your finances, in your relationship, in your health, in your career. You are responsible for that. It's not your boss's fault that you hate your job. It's your fault that you hate your job. If you don't want to have that job, find another job. Go out and study and prepare yourself and better yourself for another job, a better career. If you have aspirations of owning a business, figure out what that takes to create a business and go out there and create a business. You have that ability in you. You just have to figure out where that ability is inside of you, way down deep inside, and pull it out and test it. Test the waters on these things, on these ideas. If you're in a relationship that's not healthy or that's not helping you right now, look into figuring out how to fix the relationship or figuring out how to get out of it. We have toxic people. There are toxic people in the world, and there can be toxic people in your life. And so you have to take responsibility for yourself and rid yourself of those toxic people. Sometimes you have to cut people out of your life that just aren't part of the process anymore. Sometimes as you grow, you find there will be people that fall away just because you become less tolerable of who they are and their toxicity or their negativity. You become less tolerable of that. And as you become less tolerable of that, you begin to distance yourself from them. And as you distance yourself from them, they'll eventually will fall away. There are people who just don't need to be in your life. The motivational speaker, a guy named Jim Rohn, said back in the 80s, he said, "Don't wish it was easier, wish you were better." Don't look for things to be easy in life. Figure out how you can get better at things in life and how you can improve yourself. Another great thing that Jim Rohn said actually was that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that's not really a rule necessarily. It's just kind of a rule of thumb, if you will, to help you focus on having the right people in your circle, having the right people in your life and what it is that you're doing. Have people who are there to support you. Have people that are there to challenge you as well. That's not to say create a network of yes men. That's to say have people who push you to do better and to be better so that you want to create this life that you want to have, or so that you have the belief that you can create this life you want to have. A few years ago, many years ago, probably 25 years ago, I was having a conversation with a guy who was a subscriber to a magazine called The Robb Report. And The Robb Report is a magazine that has to do with wealth and prestige and all of the trappings of what that is. Fine wines and scotch and great cigars and boats and fancy cars and all that stuff. And I asked him, why do you read these magazines? And one of the things that he said, and I actually talk about this in my book, one of the things that he said was, I read these magazines because it helps me to see that this life is possible. It helps me to believe that I can make this happen. I can do this. Because if somebody else has the ability to do this, somebody else has the ability to live this life that I'm interested in living, then that means it is within the realm of human potential. And if it's within the realm of human potential, I'm a pretty smart guy. I think I have the potential to do it as well. And so I think that that's really a big part of the whole process of creating this ideal version of yourself. You can create the vision all day, but until you take that vision and internalize it and take full responsibility for it and begin to make the steps necessary to deconstruct your opinions about things and deconstruct your beliefs and try to find what things are holding you back from a limiting belief perspective. That's a big, big piece of radical responsibility, is taking responsibility for what you believe. And when you take responsibility for what you believe, your beliefs sum up into your thoughts, and your thoughts precede your actions, and your actions produce results, whatever actions those are. If I'm sitting on the couch eating Doritos and bitching and moaning about my life, I'm going to have a very different perspective on things, and I'm going to have very different results than I will if I'm watching what I'm eating, or if I'm going to the gym and doing exercises, or cycling or running, or whatever exercise it is, that whatever training regimen that you enjoy in part of that process. Those build two very different outcomes, and those very different outcomes come from what you think, and you are ultimately responsible for what you think. So take this idea of radical responsibility, and I challenge you on this video here and on this podcast to write some of these things down. Write down what areas of your life you think you're not responsible for, and then ask yourself the question, how am I responsible for this part of my life? It's a really simple exercise. If you're unhappy with areas of your life, write it out. Write down what you're unhappy with, and then ask the question, how am I responsible for this? And you'll be surprised by how many ideas come to your head about how you're responsible for this. You don't like where you live? How am I responsible for this? You don't like your relationship? How am I responsible for this? Where is my responsibility in this? You don't like how you look? You don't like your health situation? How am I responsible for this? Because when I start to ask how I'm responsible, I will start to develop plans to take new actions and to change my thinking to become responsible for it, and to accept that responsibility, and to make the changes that I want to make. So that's it, guys. That's all I've got for you today on the Killing a Fat Guy Show podcast and on Mindset Monday TV. We're going to try merging these two items together and see how that plays out over the next few weeks. I think it should be pretty interesting as we go forward. Or maybe I'll just start putting up the podcast separately as a video podcast like I'm doing right now, and then do a Mindset Monday thing later on. But I might try to merge the two things together. I don't know. It's all a work in progress and seeing how we can make it all function. So thank you guys for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and for watching today. If you'd like to get a copy of my book, you can do so just by going to killingafatguybook.com. That'll take you right to the book page on my website. For today's show notes, I will put up a couple of video links on the website at killingafatguy.com/show notes. And we'll talk a little bit about responsibility. I'll put some links up to some articles and a couple of videos that I've been looking at and that have been helping me shape and explore this idea of radical responsibility, taking radical responsibility for your life. So if you do like this video or this podcast, please like, share, comment, let me know what you think. And you can always check me out on Instagram. It's just at Killing a Fat Guy on Instagram. I post up there pretty consistently, and you can get this information, all of my information, through my website at killingafatguy.com. So thank you guys very much for watching today and for listening, and we will talk again next week. Have a great week.